Matthew Zapruder is the author of 4 collections of poetry. His poetry, essays, and translations have appeared in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Tin House, and The Believer. An associate professor in the St. Mary's College of California MFA program and English department, he is also editor-at-large at Wave Books, and from 2016 to 2017 was the editor of the poetry page of the New York Times Magazine. He lives in Oakland, California with his wife and son, and that's where we are right now to talk about his latest book, Why Poetry, published by Echo Press. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thanks, Nigel. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for coming out to hang out in Oakland. We've already had a little walk around the city. It was nice.
We have on a very important mission.
We did go on an important mission. We were in search of essential provisions.
I caught the last half of a reading by a friend of yours yesterday, Steve Almond, whose latest book is entitled Bad Stories, What the Hell Just Happened to Our Country? And I'm going to quote from that. Joseph Conrad, so famous for peering into our heart of darkness, never lost his great faith in the act of storytelling and the pursuit of art more broadly. Scientists and thinkers, he observed, make their appeal to those qualities that fit us best for the hazardous enterprise of living. The artist, by contrast, speaks to our capacity for delight and wonder, to the sense of mystery surrounding our lives, to our sense of pity and beauty and pain, to the latent feeling of fellowship with all creation, and to the subtle but invincible conviction of solidarity, in dreams, in joy, in sorrow, in inspirations, in illusions, which binds men to each other, which binds together all humanity, the dead to the living to the unborn. That seems to me a pretty good explanation of why poetry.
Why do you think why poetry? I thought he was talking about storytelling.
Well, he's talking about our sense of mystery surrounding our lives. He's talking about a sense of pity and beauty and pain, and to the latent feeling of fellowship. And I think that you make that point quite stridently in your book about the importance of connecting to other people.
Yeah, for sure. To me, that's what all art is about. It's a lot about connection, but it's also about just opening up the possibilities of living and the borders or kind of the normal ways that we move through the world and experience it. And I feel like that quote so beautifully kind of captures that other realm or the way that life can feel like it's expanding beyond the ordinary, and become much more significant. And yeah, I think all forms of art are looking for that, but they just do it in different ways, which is great. But poetry has its own ways.
And what are those ways?
Well, they're obviously not the ways of music and not the ways of visual art, because it uses words, and I try in the book to make some distinctions between what I think other uses of language are doing, and poetry in particular. It's a kind of an elusive thing to try to capture, but I try to do it both by explaining it and then by using a lot of examples. And I think there's several things that poetry does that other forms of writing don't primarily set themselves to doing. They might do it along the way, but I think the main thing is just with poetry, it has to do with when you're a poet, the thing you're interested in is something other than the thing you're usually interested in when you're using language. And what starts to happen when you get interested in something else besides that thing is, then you start to have poetry. And that's why there's just so many different kinds of poetry too. It's like you can't say, that's poetry and that isn't poetry, because it's not about, the surface kind of, manifestations necessarily. It's about some kind of deeper motivation, in my mind.
So with the other kind of writing, you're trying to make a point, you're trying to express an opinion, you're trying to argue a case, you're trying to explain something, describe something. What's different about poetry then?
Yeah, the thing is that, of course, you and I could very easily come up with examples of poems that do all those things you just said.
Yeah.
That explain, describe, argue, advocate, whatever the other things, prove. But I think ultimately, poems are interested in exploring the material of language itself.
Okay.
And so along the way, they might get interested in telling a story or explaining something or making an argument for something. But at some point, they're always willing to abandon that purpose in the pleasure and the interest of the material itself. It's in the same way, to use an example, if you're a painter, you might be painting a picture of a face or a landscape. But at some point, you're going to get interested in what the paint can do, and you're going to choose to follow that as opposed to fidelity. You're not a real estate agent trying to sell a house.
You're not taking a photograph.
You're not taking a photograph. You're ultimately interested in paint. And if the thing that lets you get interested in paint is representational work, then great. But for some people, it's abstraction.
Yeah.
And so I would draw a connection or an analogy between that and writing. And many poets are sort of representational in their approach. Their work is narrative or explanatory or even didactic or polemical or whatever. But ultimately, you got to ask yourself, why are they making poems and not writing essays?
Right.
Or writing political speeches or writing editorials for the newspaper or sermons.
Okay.
Because they're interested in something else. It's an impulse, and I think poets, they indulge themselves in that impulse when they feel like it.
That impulse to explore the relationship between language and what it represents.
Yeah, to trouble it, to turn it around, to find the contradictions, to not be consistent. That's why, when you're reading a poem and somebody says, they want to criticize the poem more because it's like it's not, for instance, it's like not consistent or contradicts itself or it doesn't follow through on some argument or whatever. I think that's just an absurd reason to critique a poem. It might be a very good reason to critique an essay.
Right.
There's that famous principle called Chekhov's gun, which you're probably familiar with.
Yeah.
Many people are familiar with this idea.
Yeah.
I often, if I'm trying to explain to my students or something, I'll say, I explain this principle, which is, this idea that if there's a gun, I think it's if there's a gun, and he says on the wall, in the first act, it has to go off by the end of the play, right? That's basically it.
Yeah.
And for poets, that's not true. They don't, if there's a gun on the wall at the beginning of a poem, it never has to be referred to again. It's not a failure, it's not an artistic failure,
No.
It's not an aesthetic failure if that happens.
Yeah, it's not something that you are expecting. You don't read a poet or a poem to sort of expect the logical outcome.
Yeah, it's about surprise a lot of the time. It's about, in the book I write about what I think is, one of the great poems, On&nbsp, and I write about that and how the end of the poem, is beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all you need to know on earth, that is all you know on earth and all you need to know. And I write about how every time I read that, it seems true to me in the moment of reading it. But then, of course, if you step back from it, just strictly speaking, that's kind of an absurd statement. That's not all ye need to know on earth. It's ridiculous.
Right.
You need to know a lot of other things.
Yeah, a lot of practical things, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of other things. It's not just as a kind of life principle. It's not really great guidance. but it's as in the moment of reading, the fact that the poem makes that true in that moment is such a miracle each time. It's such a blessing to have that experience.
Yeah.
To get to have that. And if you were writing philosophy, you wouldn't get to have that moment. You get to have something else, but you wouldn't get to have that feeling or that pleasure.
So
does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm making a genre argument basically.
Right.
And it's old fashioned to make a genre argument. People don't, genre is very unfashionable right now. So crossing genres, blending genres, people are suspicious about the idea of genre, which I think is good. I think it's good for people to be suspicious about it. But I think genre is useful when you're trying to sort of clarify certain things that are confusing, and definitely the purpose of poetry is something that's confusing for people. So it can help to think at least provisionally about genre.
Yeah, I mean, it helps you think clearly about why poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why anything? I mean, isn't that really what genre is? It's why. What's a story? What's a play? What's an essay? What's a sermon? What's an editorial? What's a memo to your boss? You have to have some sense of purpose. That's what is purpose and audience. That's but you're kind of the same thing. That's what determines those things.
So poetry is what's lost in translation. Then, would you agree with that?
No, I think that's one of those. I don't agree with that. I think that I love that because it's so beautiful, but I found it to not be true.
Okay, explain that.
Because I love I've translated and I read translations, and I love translations, and I find so much poetry in the translation.
Well, what about though the translation between what you're seeing out there and experiencing and what you're putting down in language?
No, I think it's the opposite. I think poetry's in the poem. It's not what's lost. It's what's gained. I think it's exactly wrong. I mean, I understand why that's said. I mean, it's an interesting idea, but I think it's absolutely wrong, because I think that in fact poetry is
something that's added, not lost.
It doesn't exist until the poem is made.
Right.
I mean, there's no poetry without the poem.
Yeah.
So I mean, whether it's a translation, literally a translation. I know you meant it more kind of like in terms of experience or something.
In terms of the limitations of what language.
In my experience, there's no poetry without poems, and so I don't know how it works. And each time I personally do it, and each time I find it, it's a mystery to me. But I find poetry again and again in poems, and it's so strange because they're just words. They're just little scribbles. How is that possible? How is it possible all that feeling and all those thoughts and ideas can exist in these little tiny scraps of whatever, little chicken scratchings in the wind, kind of how's that work? But it works.
It is kind of miraculous.
Oh, it's a total miracle.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, I'm not one of those people that goes around evangelizing or sighing and oohing and ahhing over every single poem I run into, but over the years I've come across a pretty good pile of poems that I've read that are, I think, in some ways, the highest examples of human achievement. In some ways, because
of the way they made you feel.
Yeah, feel, think, what they've opened up for me, possibilities of just thinking and experience, and just the whole. I mean, it's almost like each of these poets I'm thinking about, if I'm thinking about Keats, or I'm thinking about, obviously, Shakespeare, or I'm thinking about, someone like even more contemporary poets, like somebody like, James Tate, who was my teacher at UMass Amherst, or someone like Amiri Baraka, or Audre Lorde, or even, I think about Tu Fu or Li Po from the 9th century Tang Dynasty poets, or all the Eastern and Central European poets I love so much, or whoever, all of them. We could just go on and on.
Right.
Each one of them is almost like a little world. They had their minds are these worlds, and once I read them, I think it's like a whole way of seeing the world and understand the world that's different from mine, but yet which I can get involved in, opens up, and it's just so. It never gets old for me to read. I mean, I love the haiku poets, like Busan is a favorite of mine. I just read him and I think, God, what? How did he think that way? It's amazing to me. It's amazing.
So it's like you're able to live another life then.
Yeah, right.
And that's basically, you've got your own life, but just think of it. You're here on Earth for X amount of time, and this gives you a way to experience another life.
Yeah, and I mean, you can say that about stories too.
And
it's not just only poetry, but
No.
but in poetry it's different because it's and I love fiction, and I mean, I read stories and novels and essays. I mean, I read a lot of prose. It's not. I'm a big lover of prose, but I do think that there's something about the kind of immediacy of the mind itself that opens up to you to a reader in poetry. just the kind of almost like the pure workings of the mind that can open up when you're reading a poem. And it's so, if you find the right poem or the right poet, and it's just...
What do you mean by that? It works. I know you mentioned in your book about that the way a poem sort of moves through a way of thinking or trying to record something.
It's like being purely haunted. I mean, when you read a poet that you like or love, let's say love, not just like, but you're just like this. Whoa, it's beyond like, oh, I admire this or whatever. But you're just like,
I haven't found that many that I feel the way you feel.
Well, there might not be that many for you.
Like you feel that way about a ton of poets.
Not a ton. I mean, I feel that way about more than a handful, but I don't feel that way about most poets. But I mean, and I feel that way about some, and other people feel that way. But I mean, for instance, like I know there's people who like really, really adore Yeats, for instance. Mm-hmm. It's just like for them, Yeats. And I really like Yeats a lot, and I especially like some of his very early poems and some of his very late poems. The ones that everybody likes. I'm kind of like, I mean, everybody likes those poems. You have to be an idiot not to like, whatever. But I don't have that sense of like immense connection with his mind. Personally, it's just like a personal thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's not everybody, everybody has to have their own poets. So I'm not going to sit and argue if somebody says to me, oh, for me, the poet is like, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I think of an example. Like Seamus Heaney. Oh, Seamus Heaney. I mean, I'm not going to, personally, that's not the poet for me. But I'm not going to argue with somebody about it because it's, in a way, it's just a...
Well, you can't argue with someone about that.
No. I mean, you think, he's a great poet and he's amazing. And it's funny, after Heaney died, I was asked to write a thing. For some reason... Poetry Ireland, which is this magazine, very fine magazine from Ireland. I do not know why, but they asked me to write something about Heaney. And I'm not a big Heaney fan. I mean, I'll dislike him, but I'm just not. And I thought, shit, all right. And so I looked through, and finally I found this poem. It's called Oysters. I really read it a bunch of times, so I was going to write about it. And I thought, this is a really great poem. I could totally see why people love Heaney. I got it. But just for me, he's not my people. Mm-hmm. I have my own.
What's
people.
Your people then? And we don't have to go through a whole list here. But what's the criteria for being your people?
It's what I'm saying. It's just this kind of spiritual connection. I mean, that you feel related to them, like they're your brothers almost or sisters. Yeah. And I know that sounds a little sentimental and stupid, but like for me, it happened. The time that it really happened, I would say, like with a group of poets, the most kind of powerfully was when I started reading poets from Central and Eastern Europe from the early and mid 20th centuries. So I mean, we could go down the list of Milosz, Zbigniew Herbert, Wisława Szymborska, Vasco Popa, Tomasz Szalaman.
You studied Russian, right?
I did. I studied Russian, but that wasn't how I knew that work. It was I knew it. I got to know it sort of because it was starting to be read a lot when I was first starting to write poetry. In the early mid '90s, a lot of that work was being translated, and it was And my friends who knew more about poetry were handing me these books, and I fell in love with that. A big reason I think I fell in love with it was because their work is very clear. It was different from a lot of the work that was being written or talked about a lot in American poetry in the '90s. It was very direct.
Yeah, and you make a point about that. You talk about the fact that, and I'll dig it up here in a minute, but it's about the fact that clarity. Maybe you tell me about clarity specifically, what it does, why you are so high on clarity.
Yeah, well, for me, clarity is not about an ease of understanding or kind of. I think sometimes what people mean by clarity is they mean you should be able to understand everything about something more or less immediately. And that is not what I mean by that. What I mean by it is a kind of openness on the part of the reader, a way of like a sense that nothing is being deliberately kept away.
It's an honest attempt to say something to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all feel that in the writing that we love. I don't know. It's all these words and phrases. They're hard because they're abstract. But I think You know, I just think that people think that poets deliberately hide what they mean, and it's just so stupid. Like, poets don't do that. Some do.
Okay,
not in my experience. I've met a lot of poets, and I never met any good ones that do that.
Okay, if I read, I don't think I've ever been more angry when I sense that bond or that agreement between the reader and the writer has been violated. It's only a sense.
You're very sensitive.
Maybe I am.
It's good. No, it's great.
Maybe I am.
That's praise.
But
you take it seriously. It's important to you.
Well, and it gets me really angry.
Yeah.
If I think I'm being bullshitted here.
Yeah.
And it's not that I want to find information, or I don't want it to be logical, and I don't necessarily want a message.
Yeah.
If there is a message, that's great, and if it's one that I think is profound, that's great. But I have to, if it's not that, and if I think I'm being bullshitted, and it's not beautiful, then I think it's crap.
Well, yeah, and that's fair enough. I mean, obviously we could say, it's tough because.
How do you determine what?
Look, everybody. I think it's totally great to have a super emotional reaction to a piece of writing and say, I think this is ugly. And that's and you can both have that feeling very strongly in yourself and also sort of like recognize in some kind of like intellectual level that it's subjective and that somebody else might not feel that way, of course, but you can't help feeling that way, that anger,
But I think the anger is more a violation of an agreement and that's what you're getting at.
Yeah.
The importance of that agreement, or that, what's the word for it? That a genuine, honest attempt on the part of the author, which is what you're saying clarity is about.
Yeah, I would say also that what do I want to say? The willingness to explore things that are outside the bounds of propriety is something that I really appreciate. So sometimes people will push, they'll play, they'll try, and maybe it doesn't work out, I'm not everything, we're artists, poets are artists, not everything they do is going to work out, not everything is going to be
And how do you determine if it's legitimate?
I think...
How do you determine that they're good faith?
Well, you don't know. You don't know. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that because sometimes people don't even know themselves.
Yeah.
I've been a poet now for, it always seems funny to me when I say that I'm a poet. I feel, I've been doing this, for now 20 plus years. And I've always done it with good faith, but that doesn't mean that I have always been truly honest with the reader, because I don't sometimes you don't know you're not being honest. You're trying, but you're not ready yet, or you're trying something, and that's the difference between work that is going to last and work that isn't. And when you're making it, you don't always know. You're just doing the best you can, and not everything. I'm pretty careful about what I publish, so I think ultimately the work that I've published, I stand very strongly behind it. I don't look at it back at it now, and think that there's anything that I always think, that was the best I could have possibly done, and I'm proud of what I did. But there's a lot of other work that didn't make it into the books and didn't get published that was made with the best of intentions.
Mm-hmm. I think that's all you can ask as a reader, is the best of intentions.
And the poets I know is how that, but I will say, sometimes, I've seen people make mistakes and just publish things. Well, I don't even know why we're talking about this, but...
You say that some poets just want to sound smart.
Yeah, well, I'm more talking about that. I think in that part of the book, I'm sort of more talking about students and sort of trying to help them, because I think that there's it's sort of, my experience has been that, that younger artists in general, they're very unsure of themselves, however they present. Millimeter below the surface, I use the metric system there. I'm already pandering to you. But the below the surface, they're very unsure of themselves and trying to figure. And I think that it's natural for people sometimes to try to artificially generate kind of like a mystery or artificially generate some kind of sense of that strangeness that isn't authentically there. And the way that they artificially do it sometimes is by deliberately hiding what they mean, or speaking in a complicated way, or an overly ornate way, or an overly, tangled up way. And my job as a teacher is to try to untangle that and reassure them in a way that their minds, if they open their minds are much stranger than they believe that they are, and that just being open about the strangeness of your mind is the first step to being a poet, or any kind of artist, actually.
And that strangeness and mystery is something you strive for, I guess.
I think so. Don't you think? We don't read for the ordinary. We have the ordinary. We're surrounded by the ordinary. I don't think so. I find in so much contemporary art immense ordinariness and boredom and tedium, and I
well, at least 95% of it's that way.
At least, and I think people are trying to find it. And there's a lot going on right now. Artists are banged up right now, by the world, by social media, by politics, by the demands of economics on them. There's a lot of pressures on artists. Maybe there always have been, but it seems to me now there's a lot, and I see it in people's work. I see people trying to push back against that and deal with these pressures and deal with their fears and anxieties about the world and anger and upset and all this stuff. And so I think that can sometimes it can often overwhelm the poems. So what you get are kind of like almost like records of the traumas of our time, but you don't get poems that push back enough against those things. That takes a kind of certain kind of ability, I guess, or strength or something, and sometimes people just don't have that.
Push back to get where?
Push back to get to a freedom of mind and a freedom of imagination and a freedom of language. Just for example, I'll just take it just again to try to be concrete for a second. There's a new book. Terrence Hayes, who's a terrific poet, peer of mine, friend of mine, has these poems. He has a new book that's coming out called American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. They're called. It's just coming out, and the poems have the same title, and they're all sonnets. They don't rhyme, but they're all 14 lines, and they are suffused with racial. Terrence is African American. They're suffused with racial, social, political anger, all those forces. Yet they push against them, and the language is turned and torqued, and it's liberated. And it plays with those things, and it's such a master performance. And that's what I mean by art. These are poems. These are real poems, and they're not. It's not because they don't avoid any of those things.
So it includes the anger, or it pushes.
Yeah.
Against
Oh
the
no.
anger?
It includes the anger is there, and then it's pushed back against. There's humor. There's pleasure. There's the intellect. There's giving in. There's despair. There's all the things that you find in great art,
Right.
But they
Takes the full kind of range.
Yeah, and often sometimes from line to line. It's like, and so it's a very, kind of. This is what I mean about a person who has the mental and aesthetic strength to deal with these forces. It takes a strong artist to deal with this with this time we're in right now. This is no joke right now.
It's an extreme time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of artists, I think, who are getting completely overwhelmed. And so they're writing these poems that are like I said, like almost more like records of the trauma. And I don't, maybe that's a worthy use of literature. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not, but I'm saying for me, I testimony is not in and of itself. You
want to understand it and you want to cope with it. Is that what this is helping you do?
I don't know if it helps me cope exactly, because I don't know if we should be able to cope with it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we shouldn't be able to cope with this time we're in now. Maybe we should feel more upset and more sorrow, less numb. I don't know. I'm not sure, but I don't feel it takes great art to open up those feelings for us. And so I'm just using Terence's book as an example, but there are other examples of American poets who are very powerfully doing this kind of work. And then there are other people whose work isn't primarily about political or social or ecological matters, which I think is also quite worthwhile.
Can you describe Keats's formulation of negative capability? And why do you like it?
Well, I think it has to do with everything we've just been talking about. I mean, it's a well-known formulation. Sometimes I joke that I'm contractually obligated to mention it, like every time I talk about.
That's how I felt.
No, but it's this letter that he wrote his brothers, in which he wrote these many, many, many beautiful letters, in which he sort of, along the way of talking about his life, he will start to kind of wander into these aesthetic disquisitions. So they have a very natural kind of like organic quality. He's basically trying to figure out like what makes a great artist, and he's talking about different things and going to see a play and seeing a painting he really likes and all this stuff. And then towards the end of the letter, he talks about Shakespeare, who was his probably main readerly obsession, Shakespeare, the plays particularly, and he talks about how Shakespeare was the great thinker, great artist, because he was able to be in the middle of contradictions, without an irritable reaching after fact or reason, he says. And that ability to be in multiple forces, and somehow both manage them and let them be what they are and not make a lot of hierarchies, or if you do make hierarchies, to let those hierarchies continually shift. I think that's...
What do you mean hierarchies?
Hierarchies of like this idea is more important than that idea, or this is more right than that. Let's just, for example, let's say, being nice to someone is more important than expressing yourself or something, or that kind of thing, like those, to be suddenly floating in this space where those things are all shifting and their relations are continually shifting is exciting and destabilizing. And that, I think, for him is the place of poetry. And that's for me too. So when you're in school or you're in the presence of a very tight-ass critic who's constantly lecturing everybody about what what's important, or what the main point of this is, or whatever, blah, blah. That's why it feels so inimical and destructive towards the experience of poetry, at least for me, because I'm like, no, poetry is a living thing. And you can...
Well, it's an interaction with the reader's mind and the reader's experiences, right? And that's unique.
Yeah, and you can say, but also there are lots of things you can say about a poem. You can look at a poem together with another person. I mean, you and I can sit, and maybe we should. We can sit with a poem. We can say, okay, what does this say? What's it say at the beginning? What's
with
next?
A dictionary.
What's next? With a dictionary. Yeah, let's dig into what's really being said here. Let's get into it. I'm not talking about floating around in this, kind of what William Empson calls this weak ambiguity. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about getting more into the poem. But the more into a real poem you get, the more floaty things get, and drifty and exciting and dreamlike. It's like living in a dream.
Can you define drifty?
Dreamy, like shifty. It's not. You're not in a legal brief.
But then nothing's wrong then, right? So if you're in a class, you're supposed to interpret a poem. You can't say no to anything. You can't say anything's wrong.
Yes, you can. For sure you can.
You can say, here's the definition of that word, and what you're saying, definition appears nowhere in your explanation.
Well, I mean, I think, let's just pick a poem. Okay,
To Autumn.
To Autumn. Well, if someone says it's about spring, that's wrong. It's not about spring, it's about autumn. It's not only about autumn, it's to autumn. It's like an ode to autumn.
Yeah, but maybe
someone says,
maybe spring is autumn
about,
like that year.
Maybe, but it's okay. That's interesting. But let's wait till we get to that point. Or if they say, I think this poem is about him and his girlfriend. You're like, it's not really about that.
Okay.
Actually, it's about something. I mean, it might be. You can say later, that it reminds you of that or makes you think of that, or you think that's, but what's actually on the page is I mean, the thing is that people get all so worked up about this, but when you actually sit down with a reader, with a bunch of students in a class, or your friends, or your peers, and you actually look at a poem and you actually start reading it, it turns out it's very definitive what it says and what it doesn't say, actually.
Okay.
In the abstract, this seems like a scary issue, but in reality, when you actually do it, it's actually not.
Okay, so Tom Poland, respected critic, and maybe a poet as well, he says that To Autumn is about this massacre that occurred at Peterloo, the workers that were violently put down. He's saying that that's what that poem's about.
About?
Yeah. He was reading the biography.
Is this a contemporary critic, or is this?
Yeah, he's a contemporary critic, very well regarded.
I think I might just like quibble with what he means by the word about. I mean, if he means that's what inspired, or that's its.
No. That's what it's about.
So all the people throughout history, through the past however many years, 200 plus years, who have read, well, maybe not so many over 200 years, but it's 150 years, who have read that poem and thought about it and been moved by it and carried it with them all over, who didn't know anything about that, what they were just wrong. They didn't know what that poem was really about.
Yeah, they didn't know
That's
what it was about.
Stupid. That's not true. He might be right. I don't know what his argument is. It might be interesting, and he might have a lot to say, and he might have actually identified an inspiration for that poem. But to say that that's what it's about in some kind of way, as if that's the central thing it's about, is ludicrous. I mean, that's not true, because so what does he think about, what would he say about my own intimate relation to that poem? Just that I was reading into it all kinds of things that weren't there.
You're doing the same thing he was.
What do you mean?
Well, you're taking your experience and relating to the words that Keats put on the page, and I suppose he's trying to justify his interpretation of it.
Well, listen, I haven't read what he has to say about it.
No.
I have a feeling that I would find it super interesting. I probably would really like it, and it probably would deepen my appreciation for the poem.
Yeah.
But I think, again, it's not really fair for us to talk about it without me having read the thing. But to say that I think what I'd probably, and I bet, I don't know this person, but I would say I bet that he would admit to the possibility of other experiences with this poem other than that one limited way of reading it.
No, he's a brilliant critic. I think a lot of people.
Where does he live?
He's British.
Oh, now I want to meet him.
Yeah.
He's excited. I love it when somebody has like a kind of completely idiosyncratic take on like a famous poem. It's great. It's like really exciting. Mm-hmm. I probably got a little worked up about that because like I have just such an intimate emotional connection to that poem.
Yeah, I got worked up about it too. But
it's great. It's like I actually think. See, I like it when I and other people get angry. You were saying earlier, you're like, you get mad about a poem or a poet or something like that, and I always find that like very heartening that people can care that much.
So few people care about poetry anyway, right? Which is sad.
A lot of people care about poetry. What do you mean by so few?
Well, I mean the percentage of the population that cares about poetry, maybe 5%.
It's a lot of people. 5%. I mean, that's like, I don't know. It's like, listen, I wish it were more. I wish more people. I'm not.
Well, then wouldn't be in the mess that we're in.
That's true. If everybody read poetry, we wouldn't know. I don't know if that's true, but
yeah.
I don't really. I think a lot of people like poetry. They just don't know what it is, and they don't. I'm not some kind of traveling salesman for poetry or whatever, but like what I do.
Well, in a way, that's what my poetry is about.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Well, because you kind of get drawn. I write about this in the introduction. You kind of get drawn into that role as a poet. Like you sort of get pulled into being an explainer of it in a way. And you can there's lots of different ways you can react to it. And I certainly respect when people are like, "Oh, I'm not gonna like. It was your problem. Just read the book." Like I like listening to Alice's. Alice Notley, the interview you did with her, which was great. I love how she just has like zero patience for like trying to. Try to justify this activity or explain it or whatever. I think that's like completely legitimate way to think about it. I'm totally, and I thought it was so funny when she said about, I was totally dreading when you brought up my book, it's like, and I was like, oh man, she's gonna kill me, and like, I love Allison, and she's amazing, and like, and her sons I'm real good friends with both her sons, but I was like, oh man, she's totally gonna like nail me, and sure enough, she said this. I thought what she said was so funny. I think she said what she said. She's like, he's trying really hard, which is like really true. I mean, I was like, oh man, you're right. I am trying really hard. But no, she's great. She's the best. Yeah. But like, so her reaction is like, screw it. Like, it's all there. Like, you're like, I'm not going to sit here and like, tell you why. Like, and so and I really appreciate that as a reaction. But like for me, I just thought, oh, what would it be like to go the other direction and really take every objection seriously, every objection to poetry, every complaint, every frustration with it. Just say like, what would it be like to just say, okay, like, let me try to explain this to you. Let me try to show you, And I didn't know. That was the impulse of writing the book, and I did not know how that was going to work out. Maybe there would be no book there.
I thought it worked out pretty damn well.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, it was fun to write. It would turn out to be fun to do it, too, which if it hadn't been, I mean, it was brutal and hard and a lot of frustration, and my wife, had to put up with me complaining pretty much for 5 years straight. But it took a long time to write this book. I mean, it was completely brutal. I mean, it was a brutal process, but...
The usefulness of poetry has less to do with delivering a message and more to do with re-enlivening, reactivating language, drawing us into a different form of attention and awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's ideas sort of... There's not a lot...
What is that different form of attention?
Well, there's not a lot of literary theory in this book, but there are a few times I mention literary critics, and the main person I mentioned is Viktor Shklovsky, who's this, early 20th century Russian critic who came up with this concept of defamiliarization. And that is what his idea is that art in general is about strangifying experience.
Kind of the shock of the new.
Yeah, well, and not just, I wouldn't say the new, it's like he says that habitualization, getting used to things is sort of how we move through the world, and he has a great quote, I think a quote in the book which says, habitualization destroys, one's love of one's wife and one's fear of war, whatever. And so like the role of art is to wake us. We're sleepwalking. We have to. Yeah. I mean, think about all the different things that happen just to function.
Yeah.
And so that re-enlivening of language, that waking ourselves up again to its true strangeness is, to a great extent, the function of poetry. And again, it relates to what we were talking about earlier. We were saying, what happens when you free yourself as a poet from other obligations, like making a point or being consistent or telling a story or something. Well, then you get to kind of do this re-enlivening work, this strangifying work. Yeah. Because you can, and it's just like a very practical thing. Like as a writer, you're kind of like tapping away or scribbling away or whatever, and you have a choice. You like, am I gonna follow this character? Am I going to do character development? Or am I going to do description? Or am I going to explore this idea? Am I going to do justice to this thought and write or am I going to do something? Am I going to start to play with the material of language itself? And I think for poets, it can often become, I'm making this weird kind of like finger rubby gesture right now, but like it can become an almost kind of like physical textural thing with language, where you're like, what can I do with this word? How can I make it last and reverberate and like and feel,
or add more meaning to it,
reveal its meaning,
right?
Reveal, maybe even add, even add. Maybe that can be. I mean, that's big magic to add add meaning.
Well, look at Shakespeare. How many words he invented?
He was a great magician.
He invented
for
so
sure.
many words.
Shakespeare was that's right. He was like the wizard.
Yeah,
he could make new words.
Yeah.
Most poets, it's all they can do to use them.
Well, I suppose you can make a new word. Why not? I mean,
you can make
understand what it means,
but it's one thing
in context they might, but
sure. But Shakespeare could do it in a way that made it seem like you don't even notice he's doing it. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, I just read The Tempest again, and he's making up stuff left and right in there, and it's and you're just like, man, this guy was not the same species as I am. I mean, it's just like his ability to write is just different. I mean, there's people that come along. I mean, there's Mozart. There's people who come along who are just like, they're like aliens. They're not like us.
No.
So they have some other kind of thing going on. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he made up words.
Yeah.
Many.
The desire to write anything begins out of a basic human desire to express oneself, to be heard. We kind of touched on that.
Well, do you think that's true? Does that sound right to you?
I do think. I mean, I think it has to do with people needing and wanting some kind of attention. And that part of that is telling your story.
I was sort of thinking, I think that's true, but I was sort of almost thinking more in like kind of a primal way. It's like you're alone in the world, you're alone in the darkness. You start to sing, you make noise because you feel afraid. You need to hear yourself. That silence is very scary. And so you start to talk, and the talking both reminds you that you're there, and then also can connect you with the other people. You call out across the cave or whatever to the other people, and like suddenly there's like a thing going on, and then you're like, are you not alone?
Yeah, you don't just want to be heard, you want to be answered too.
Yeah, I think yes. I think that if you're not a total narcissist, you want to be answered. You don't just want to be heard. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that's the mark of, it's funny, writing poems is like, it can seem on one hand like a monologue because it's like coming from one person. Mm-hmm. But I think it's so, what I feel in all poems that are great is the immense desire for conversation and for connection, an openness, like a continual opening to the desire for a readerly consciousness. Like that's what I feel when I'm reading the poem. I feel a constant invitation to think along with the person and be in dialogue with them. And that to me is the mark also of, that may be another difference between what I think of being really good poems and poems that aren't as good. Is that poems that aren't as good can feel really hermetic and like they're not open,
pushing the reader away. It's
they're just there to be admired. They're there that I feel like, and I see this sometimes in my students, where I'm like, you wrote this poem and you seem to want us to stand outside and admire it. Yeah. And maybe that is an artistic experience that some people like. Maybe they like to be outside of a work.
Well, no, I like if there's a phrase that I think is just a killer phrase, and I can admire it, and that's why I read a lot of fiction. If there's a phrase that I can take out of there that I think, wow, I can admire it.
I read fiction. I just love being told stories, and I just love to read stories, and read about other people's lives, and read and hear other people talk. I'm compelled by that. I mean, I read a lot of fiction, but it's like I just think about probably one of the first poems I fell in love with was Proof Rock, and begins, let us go then, you and I, and obviously, who is that you? Yeah, it's me. There is no other you. He's alone. He's lonely. He wants another person, and that other person is me. And you just fall into that poem. I mean, not everybody does, but I did. Let us go then, you and I, where evening spreads against the side, like a patient he thrives upon a table. You're just like, I'm with this weird clerk, this pathetic, virginal, balding, sad clerk. Wears his trousers rolled. But he's he's a beautiful man. He's a beautiful, sad man. It's for some reason my 20-year-old self really identified with that. Yeah. It seems strange when you think about it now, but
well, it's cheap. This is cheapening the point, but I've read that if you're writing a headline on a website, you use the word you.
Sure.
And so they've clued into the fact that it's a very powerful word. You want to read about you. You want to know how this piece of writing is going to affect my life.
Well, the poet who I associate most with that behavior who was an extremely important poet for me and my peers, and I would say across a lot of aesthetics in America, and who I don't think is nearly as important in, let's say, Canada or England or Europe, is Frank O'Hara.
Yeah.
And I think that O'Hara's influence is immense, and his talent was immense. I think that sometimes you can explain a lot about the difference between Canadian and American poetry, or British and American poetry, by thinking about O'Hara. Because the particularities of his...
He died at 40, right? He
Yeah.
got hit by a car. Was it a car?
Dune buggy. He was on Fire Island, and it was at night, and the vehicle he was riding in broke down, and everybody got out so they could fix the vehicle, and a dune buggy came by and killed him. He was 40, so young. I mean, I remember when I first read about that, it didn't seem that young, but of course now it's like he's a baby, right?
Yeah.
No, it was a complete disaster. I mean, and his friends were, of course, his friends, John Ashbery and Kenneth Koch and James Schuyler, and he worked at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I mean, he's all friends with all kinds of painters and artists and filmmakers, and he was just a brilliant, person. But anyway, his attitude about the poem, that it was like almost like kind of like a letter to another person, or it was like a conversation, or it took place in a social environment, I think is so influential for American poets in all kinds of different ways. And he was a very gifted poet. He's known for a certain kind of like chatty, this, what people call I do this, I do that poems, like I was here and I ran, then I buy the cigarettes here and I buy that there, and I go...
Like a Facebook post.
Yeah, proto Facebook. But he's sort of the most anthologized poems would be like The Day Lady Died or whatever, which is the one where he's walking around New York or whatever, and then he sees the New York Post headline about Lady Day dying and Billie Holiday. But he also wrote these long odes, very lyric, highly surrealistic. His facility with language and the image was extraordinary, and he was able to do lots of different sorts of things, and he was a pretty radical artist, and he was immensely talented. I mean, I think of all the New York School poets, of course I'm a big Ashbery fan. My favorite might be James Schuyler, but I think O'Hara was the greatest of them, in my opinion. But he died, he didn't have a chance to write as much as Ashbery did. I loved Ashbery, but different sort of poet. But anyway, yeah, I don't think O'Hara's is read or thought about in Canada. Is he? I don't know.
Maybe not so much. I don't know. It's funny. I knew of them, but I was just down in LA a few years ago, and we just went to a bookstore, and there was a reading there that evening, and it was, I don't know if it was in celebration of an anniversary or something.
It was the 50th anniversary of the release of Lunch Poems.
That's it.
Which was the book that Ferlinghetti put out from the City Lights imprint. Yeah. Which was a little bit unusual because ordinarily Ferlinghetti was sort of well, actually, that's not true. I was going to say he was more focused on West Coast poets, but that's actually not true because he published Howl, of course, Ginsberg, which is, even though Ginsberg was on the West Coast then, he's from East Coast. But yeah, Lunch Poems came out and they released this beautiful 50th anniversary edition.
And there was a whole bunch of it. I just showed up and
that's a great reading to show up for. That's a great reading. Did you read something?
Yes.
What'd you read? Do you remember?
You know what? I can't remember.
That's cool. That's great. You got roped in.
Yeah.
Did you like reading?
I loved it, yeah. Yeah, in fact, my wife was up there reading a bit of French, too. Just a very short little passage. It starts in French, the poem.
Oh,
and
I
it's
know
like
that poem.
It's only, like maybe 2 or 3 lines in French.
Yeah, because your wife is French.
Yeah.
That's...
Anyway.
No, and that's one of the great... I think everybody should carry that book around. That Lunch Poems. That book... There's no book that changed me more than Lunch Poems, I don't think. I would say, that opened up everything for me.
I'm just running through my copious notes that I've taken from your
Thank you
book.
for reading the book and having such great questions.
My pleasure. It really was. Poems create space for the possibilities of language as material, and we've covered that. Allow language its inherited provisionality, uncertainty, slippages, space for physicality, the way it sounds, looks, feels in the mouth.
Yeah, these are just sort of all different ways of saying what happens when you liberate yourself from obligation. Now, I've gotten a fair amount of pushback on this idea. People are like, well, are you saying that poems shouldn't be political, or they shouldn't be socially responsible, or they shouldn't be...
Yeah.
Like, are you saying they should just be about nothing and just about, like, the way language feels in the mouth or whatever?
Well, you've just said
of course
here
I'm not saying that.
Undistracted by any other overriding purpose. Where contradictions and possibilities of the material of this meaning-making system are deliberately brought forth and celebrated, undistracted by any other overriding purpose. That's where you're getting the pushback?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people think what I'm saying. I mean, it's hard because, here's the reality, is that when you write a book like this, this is such a complex subject, and it takes time to explain things. Here, you need some more Duvel. It takes time to explain things. Okay. And so if one pulls out like a particular kind of
I'm getting all the foam again.
You're
all the foam and you're getting all the liquid.
That's what happens when you hang out with an American. Okay. They're very selfish. No, look, I'm gonna remedy the situation.
That's nice.
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, and so it can sound like what I'm saying is that poems shouldn't mean anything and shouldn't be committed to anything, but I don't believe that. What I mean is that what I'm interested in is what happens when you free yourself. And then what kinds of deeper commitments do you find? Maybe to other people, maybe to ideas that can't be had immediately, that can only be had through a lot of thinking.
From the reader or the writer?
The writer. Like, I'm saying, if you were to say to me now, like in conversation, I don't know, if you were to ask me about my marriage.
Right.
There's certain things that I would say about it, positive things, because I have a good marriage and I love my wife, but what's going on that's deeper? What happens if you go deeper?
It's not all positive.
No, I don't even mean that. I just mean like what would open up for me if I went beyond the most initial truths, right. Even if they're true, and that's what interests me. That kind of liberation, that's saying like, okay, I'm not going to use any of the ways of talking about this stuff that we always say. Oh, I love my wife. She's which is all true. My wife is wonderful. She's so supportive. She's positive. All those things are true about my wife. She's amazing. Right. But like, what happens when you start to reject those phrases that have been handed down for forever, and like you start then talking about your, dangerous things can happen. You can start to have dangerous, scary, mortal ideas about being a human body in the world and all this stuff. And that's like, and it's not that it means, I'm not saying that it means that I don't believe those things.
You don't not believe the truth.
Of course I do. I mean, I love my job as a poet is not to talk about my marriage. My job as a poet is to get as deep as I can into the basic mechanisms of human experience. Yeah. We're not talking about me anymore. We're talking about how humans love each other. And
that's the only way is your own experience, or the experiences of others that you've read.
No, I don't agree with that. I think that language itself holds truths. Okay, let's not get mystical. What is language? Language is...
If we had a couple of spliffs here, we could get into this.
No, you and I, listen, you and I are talking now, but the material we're using to exchange information, each word is the product of an almost infinite number of decisions about what things mean and what they don't that arrive to us. So we're using the accumulated knowledge of everyone.
The accepted knowledge.
Just the accumulated decision making that's come before us. Right. That's how we know. And so there's immense wisdom in language. There's immense historical wisdom in language. And this is not an idea that I personally came up with. No. I mean, this is like Vico talks about this. I mean, many people talk about this. This is not, I didn't invent this idea. This is, but it's interesting. It's an idea that I had, and then once I started researching it, I realized that many other people had the same idea.
That's neat when it's
great when it
confirmed.
happens, right? So which almost is like a weird kind of echoing of what I'm talking about. But so poets are archivists. They're deep sea divers into this like weird material that we use and take for granted, when we need to. But like, what happens when you start to open it up? I mean, amazing things can happen. And so when I write my poems, I'm thinking, when I feel a word start to vibrate with energy, I'm like, okay, I need to spend a little more time with this word. What does it really mean?
It's funny because Alice talked exactly about that vibration and the fact that we're made up of molecules. And we talked about if these molecules aren't communicating effectively,
right, I remember that,
then
that's illness.
Illness.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? This vibration, or not?
What I mean is just that as a poet, I'm sitting there and I'm writing along, and it's nonsense. Just there's nothing. It's like, and then suddenly it's almost like I don't know. You ever see those old guys on the beach with like the metal detectors?
Yeah.
That's what I'm like when I'm a poet. I'm just like an old guy on the beach.
Looking for words.
With my pants pulled up too high, like, a lot of sunscreen, and a hat. It's completely undignified, like just with that, one of those things, like in the sand, just like in the sun, there's like beep, 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 beep. And I don't know where and then I'm like, okay.
There's a sweet little English TV series called The Detectorists. You gotta watch it.
Oh my God, really?
It's about, charming.
Is it about that?
It's about that.
Oh my God.
Charming.
Are you kidding me?
A lot of people don't like it.
This? Called The Detectorists?
Correct.
I have a book called The Pajamaist. Okay. So I'm like really like, this is my...
Yes.
These are my people.
Yeah.
The Detectorists. Oh my God, that's so good.
Sorry,
I love it already. No, I love it already. No, but so that's how I am. Like I'm just messing around. I'm just scribbling, and I'm just like, or looking through the dictionary, or like just thinking or whatever. And then suddenly there's some word, and I'm like, that's interesting. Like what? And then or a phrase, or like a little image or something or whatever. And I'm like, there's like something there. It starts to hum, and then I gotta just try to push against it a little bit, and.
Well, here's something then, and it's funny. I mentioned spliffs a couple of sentences ago.
You did.
I didn't get stoned very much when I was a teenager. Occasionally I did, and I didn't really like it because I wasn't able to control.
Yeah, but pot was different then when you were a teenager. When I was a teenager, you could like smoke pot. It was like having half a beer. Now it's like Carlos Castaneda, like you see like your spirit animal. It's like, who needs that? Like
I read quite a bit of him actually.
It's like too much.
But anyway, I remember having this conversation, and that's why I didn't like getting stoned. Is because I had these long conversations about nothing, and it was a waste of time.
Yeah, that conversation where you're like, maybe we're all just living inside God's fingernail, kind of like that conversation. Yeah.
Well, okay, but I wanted to bring it to words because I had a whole evening on. I've got my concept of green. But maybe it's not the same as your concept of green.
But that is true.
But we're both using the word green.
But that's true.
I know you bring something up like that in your book.
But that's true about what you start to realize when you learn a lot of foreign languages is that those languages have completely different ways of dividing up the color spectrum. And they actually, some languages, they actually don't see the same colors we do. It is absolutely impossible to believe that this is true, but they don't. They don't have a word for certain color that it's like doesn't exist for them. They literally don't see those colors. Or we don't see their colors. I find that so disturbing, actually. Like I find that very troubling, but it's true. All right, well maybe you were onto something when you were smoking that.
Maybe I should have smoked more. Yeah.
No. Even though we're in Oaksterdam, as they call it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I've been in San Francisco for 3 days now, and it seems like every street corner I smell pot.
It seems that way because in fact you do smell it in every street corner. Yeah. No, there are dispensaries. I'm not.
Is it legal or they just don't arrest you?
It is legal.
It is now. Okay.
That is personally not my drug of choice.
No.
I don't have been drugs of choice anymore because I'm father of a young child, so my drug of choice is mostly sleep. But there are a lot of people doing a lot of self-medicating, for sure.
Marianne Moore, imaginary garden. This is famous, of course. Imaginary gardens with real toads in them.
Sure.
Beautifully imagined place that contains real things. Literalists treat words not as symbols of codes, but for what they are. And this draws us into true strangeness. So again, we've sort of touched on that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's about bringing a dictionary along, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're so the beginning of the book, a lot of it is the first several chapters is just trying to clear out some bullshit about how people talk about poetry. And one of the biggest, things that I ran into when I was talking to a lot of people, in the introduction I say, I wrote this book because I was wandering around, after I had published my first couple books, giving readings and stuff, and traveling a lot, and I'd constantly be bumping into people who would ask me questions about poetry. I mean, I was just today, so I'm going to be on this show in a couple days, this NPR show called 1A, and the producer of the show called me because they do a pre-talk they want to talk to you first to make sure you're not insane or whatever, you're not an idiot, and she was basically she said the same thing to me that I've heard 5 million times from people, which is just I don't get poetry, I don't understand it. And she was really cool. She was really smart. She was super into art. She was great. But she just doesn't, and so we had the same conversation.
She seriously asked the question?
No, she was just being honest. She was just I don't really get it.
Right.
She's I don't really get it. And I've had that conversation a million times with very smart, interesting, really cool people. Yeah. And so I just thought...
your answer is take it
first
literally.
Things first.
Yeah.
First things first, you got to read it literally.
Yeah. Okay.
And it sounds so stupid to say it, but honestly, it's people skip over that part. But once you read it literally and kind of really get into the material and all that conversation that we just had about language and words and all that stuff, once you start doing that, all kinds of wonders open up. And associations, and private associations, personal things, that are great to talk about, It's cool, it's fine to say, that poem reminded me of this experience I had, or it makes me think of this, or my own personal history thing opened up. That's great. That's what art's supposed to do. But you're never going to get there if you don't put some time in with the actual choices that the poet has made.
Well, you in fact get a bit emotional, or not emotional, but...
Chippy?
Chippy, yeah. You say they teach poetry as a problem, not a joy, and that's disgraceful.
No, I'm quoting, that's a quote from the Makar, I think, of that woman in Scotland, right? Isn't that Liz Lockhead?
I don't remember, I don't know.
Yeah, I was complaining about this idea about poetry as a code. Okay. I was sort of grousing about this idea that they teach poetry as a code, and I was reading around about this, and I was saying, I was hoping that I was going to find some examples beyond just my own personal experience. And so then I happened to come across in some article, and I'll just read this little passage. It says, and I'm talking about how so many of us have been taught to read poetry as if its words mean something other than what they actually say. That's my experience as a teacher. People think that you read a poem and they're like, it doesn't mean what it actually says. It's somehow...
Yeah, you have to figure it out. You have to be smart to be able to figure it out.
Right. Or just the poet didn't mean what she or he said, which is crazy. Yeah. Poets really do mean what they say. And I said, it seems this attitude about poetry and poetic language is widespread. I recently read a quote from the Makar. That's what I said, the Makar, an enviable Scottish term for poet laureate of Glasgow, the evocatively named Liz Lockhead, who said, "The way poetry is taught at the moment is absolutely appalling. They teach poetry as a problem rather than a joy, and that's disgraceful. It's clear that even teachers think poetry is a code. I've been asked by a boy who emailed me once, when you wrote that poem about the bull, what did you really want to say? His education had allowed him to get the misapprehension that a poem is a code trying to get a message across." And it was so good to come across some other person saying that. Yeah. So there wasn't just me hectoring everyone about this idea. It was this other person who I'd never met, who comes from a completely different poetic culture, had that same experience, which was my suspicion. A lot of most poets, and since the book has come out, a lot of poets have said to me, yeah, that is a drag, the way everybody thinks that. I'm like, because you start to feel like a little bit of a crazy person. You're like, you get up there and you say things, and people look at you and they're like, well, what did you really mean by that? It's like, I meant what I said. I meant exactly what I said. I didn't mean some other thing. If I wanted to say some other thing, I would have said it. I know lots of words.
Well, you know what? I think that's that's one of the key problems of all of this sort of deconstructionism and sort of postmodernism. They seem to know what the author intent is, and it's not what's on the page.
Yeah. Well, deconstruction. Yeah. I spent a lot of time with literary theory when I was.
I'm not just blanket. I think it can be fascinating, but they don't stick to the text.
Yeah. Well, actually, I would say the deconstructionists stick very closely to the text. They do a lot of.
That's the same as new criticism, then?
No, deconstruction and new criticism are completely different things.
Okay, well,
but the
like new criticism sticks to the text.
Yeah, deconstruction is fascinated by the actual words that people are using. They're just like almost like fetishize the words themselves and what kind of ways you can like flip them around and split them out in there. I think it's sometimes the problem with deconstructionist criticism is that it can become almost. There's a point at which you can be like you can say almost anything about a text.
Well, that's
like,
that was.
But I know, but by going into the word, like you can be like. Yes, so we're agreeing. But I'm just saying, like my experience with reading deconstructionist criticism is that it fetishizes the language almost. It's like it's so focused on the materiality of it that it forgets that it actually means things. But whatever. I mean, we're generalizing now.
Okay, we're sort of closing into the last chapter of our work of. This is my work of poetry, by the way. My interviewing you is my work of poetry.
And what's that? What do you mean? Like your own encounter with it, or
no. You use connection as a key attribute of poetry. This is my way of connecting with you and with anyone who's listening.
And I think that's so cool. Like I think that's such a cool thing about podcasts. I've done some of them, and I just love the intimacy of them. It's like you have a person who's like going around, or like maybe they're having people come to their place or whatever, and like it's this conversation, and it's such a cool form. It doesn't really exist. I mean, there have been interviews that existed, but this sort of live conversation that is. It's more immediate even than a written interview, And I just think it's I love that that's your work. I think it's great. I like listening to all your interviews. I mean, it's great because like I've listened to a bunch of them and like I find myself like immensely disagreeing with lots of things people say. And like, I listened to the one by Jason Gurriel and like I was like disagreeing with like every single thing he said and like, but not in a bad way. I mean, he was just super smart, like interesting guy, but I was like, and then the one you did with that other guy, the critic who's like, the other Canadian critic,
Zach Wells.
Yeah, that was great. Everything he said, I disagreed with, but but I also thought he was immensely charming and like really great. Both of them, it was really, and so I appreciated it. Really liked it, and I just thought, oh, this is such a cool project you're doing. You're bouncing around, talking to all these people. Like, what do you,
I think that the nice thing is this: it's not commercial, and it's long form.
Yeah,
it's like the long form essay, but it's not that I have to keep interrupting you for an advertisement. It's like we can have a decent conversation and
what
see
will
where
we
it
advertise
goes.
for too? Like what if we were going to advertise? Like what if before?
Aside from your book,
what product are we selling? Like, I mean, it's like like negative. Oh yeah.
Well, we could wait a minute. We could advertise.
No, I thought I had a joke once about that would be a great like perfume. Negative capability, like that, like, but it would be like negative.
What does it smell like?
I was like negative capability for men. It'd be like a kind of like it'd be helpful. It'd be helpful in relationships.
Yeah. Well, then we could think of two smells that are the opposite, and incorporated in the same.
Oh my God! Hopefully there'd be good smells. I had a great one of my most fun things I did was I was asked to be a participant in this anthology that was going to be all about perfumes, and they said, "Can we send you a little vial?" And you just open it up, and so I was like, of course you can. And so they sent me this perfume. I guess it was a perfume. I don't know if it was a cologne or perfume, whatever it was, some kind of scent. And then so I opened it up, this little vial they sent me, and I opened it up, and it smelled amazing. And then I wrote this poem, and it was so great. And the smell, and it was a beautiful perfume. It was by this diptyque, which is this kind of, I guess they're here actually in Palo Alto, whatever. But why are we even talking about this?
I'm not really sure. I'm actually not listening right now.
Okay, good. I'm back. Let's get back into it. Let's get back into your notebook. Come on.
Okay, we're winding it down here.
All right,
just in case the listeners are hoping that it's
our 4 listeners.
That's right. The action of the mind captured on the page, writer and reader involved in it. Real-time movement of thinking down the page, tracing the movement of thought. Now we kind of touched on that. That's what a poem does, but I didn't think a poem was supposed to be sort of rational or tracing any kind of thought.
Well, I mean, rational and tracing thought are not the same thing.
True enough. And
thought is not necessarily rational. I mean, it's often
place.
not. I mean, most often not.
If you're following the movement of thinking, don't you want some sort of association or connection or?
Yeah. There needs to be some feeling that there's a reason or motivation or usefulness of the movement, but I wouldn't say that rationality or logic or what we understand as like kind of logic in the most obvious sense, that might not be the priority when it comes to poetry, but some. A lot of the time what I talk about with people who I'm close to about poetry is a key word that we use is necessity, and it's like, does the movement of the poem feel necessary? And like necessary, I think can be associated for me with almost like a moral or like humanistic imperative, human connection or like human life or commitment to being connected to other human beings or something, like that kind of logic is what I understand is, and that's like the logic of, Ode to a Nightingale. Keats, that's the logic of it. It's like, I'm dying. I hear this bird. I'm in pain. Like, how am I going to think my way through this pain? Like, that's what he's doing in that poem. And there's huge leaps in that poem. Immense leaps. Huge contradictions, which are totally authentic to that experience that he's having. It's not, but you're going to be like, oh, is it sad or is it happy? You can't like reduce it to some kind of thing, but it's immensely necessary, his speech in that poem. It's
true.
It's completely true. It's undeniably true, but in such a almost unparaphrasable way. So it just is what it is. Yeah,
that's the thing you say is that if it's a good poem, you can't say what it's about, right? Which I bridled against a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm being a little bit I'm sort of pushing against that word about. You can say many, many things about a poem, but to say what it's about feels to me a little bit like reducing it to being a single thing, and that seems to lead towards banality. I mean, you tell me, what's Ode to a Nightingale about?
It's about dying in a bird.
Okay. But like, what does that tell us
about
that poem? I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's like, or even like going back to that critic, Poulin was his name?
Yeah, Tom Paulin.
But To Autumn is about this massacre. It's like, what does that tell us about the poem? Let's stipulate he's right. But what does that tell us about the poem? Is that to use a Keatsian phrase, Keats has this great phrase, he says, death is life's high meed, M-E-E-D. Death is life's high meed, meaning it's like death is life's high, like, usefulness. Is that the high meed of To Autumn, that it's about this massacre, or is it about something like much bigger than that, about being a human being and full of sorrow? Gathering swallows twitter in the skies is the end of that poem, So that's why I would argue with him. I mean, I can't really argue with him because I haven't read his thing, but I'm saying that's what I would like. My reaction would be like, even if he's right in some kind of proximate way, Is that really the most interesting way to think about the poem?
Or moving way.
Moving.
It's not moving.
Useful way to think about it.
Right.
But, again, I mean, I probably would love his writing about it. I always like writing about anything about Keats, reading anything about Keats.
But you've said something about that poem, haven't you? You've just said that his reading isn't as good as your reading.
But I don't know. I haven't read his thing.
No,
but I don't know.
But you did say something about the poem.
Well, I reacted viscerally because I have such a kind of emotional connection to that poem. So I was like immediately angry that he was saying that it's about something else. But it's an anger based on like ignorance. So but we'll see. I'll go read it. I'll go read what he has to say.
You talk about a poem bringing you to the edge of understanding, but not quite understanding. Now, to me, that's almost frustration. For you, that's some kind of wonderful, mysterious space to be in.
It's just true to me. It's like there's only so much you can understand. And I mean, the reason I try in the book, to my great... So what happened is that when I wrote the book, I'm writing this book about reading poetry, and the whole time I'm sort of dreading being a pedant, and being reductive about this art that I love so much, and over explaining it, and like over and not, like what Alice Notley said, working too hard and like somehow not being true to what I really think about it. And so I always knew when I was writing the book that there was going to have to be a last chapter that was going to have to be about all the things I didn't know and that I didn't understand and couldn't say about poetry. It had to be that way. And I started to write that chapter. It was a very hard chapter to write, but what I ended up writing about a lot was my father dying. Yeah. To my great surprise, I didn't think that's what I was going to write about, but because that was really my closest experience of coming up against the sublime, terrifying limits of understanding. My father went where I cannot go. And, we all have that happen to us at some point. People go where we cannot go. They go away from us.
And you know what? That makes life almost, and it's happened to me a number of times, close people, and my brother and my father.
Oof.
And it makes life kind of surreal. It's like you had a concrete, beautiful relationship, and that's poof.
Yeah.
It's not here anymore.
Yeah, it's beyond understanding. Yeah, I remember the first year after my dad died that I kind of walked around in a dream, practically. I was only a quarter there. I was functioning. I could do everything, go to work and see friends and do whatever I did, but I was not fully there because I just was shocked. I think I didn't understand what had happened. No. And I don't think it is understandable. And so to me, that felt very connected with those limits of poetry, and I wanted to connect those things. And so that's why I write about Duende there, and why I write about, the greatest American poets, Whitman and Dickinson and I do write actually about Auden again there, talking about Yeats, and poetry makes nothing happen. It's nothingness and the limits of understanding, and Stevens. Yeah, so I don't know. That was a hard chapter to write, and I wasn't sure that I pulled it off in a way, but I just actually, one of your countrymen, Carmine Starnino, published that in The Walrus, which was really nice. He published that chapter in The Walrus. I really appreciated his faith in that part of the book, because I didn't know if it had come off or not.
Right.
He's a very interesting critic.
He is, yeah. I've interviewed him some years ago about one of his books of poetry. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, well, let's just finish with this then.
Back to Steve's book.
Yeah.
My man Steve.
Steve Almond. A nut.
He's a bit of a nut.
Here we go. I'm quoting from the same page. It's toward the end of his book, very close to the end of his book.
Bad stories.
Bad stories. What the hell just happened to our country?
He has, I'll just say before you read it, he does these little books that he did on his own, and one he publishes called Bad Poetry. which you would really like. And he was trying to be a poet before he became a fiction writer, and he takes these poems he wrote when he was trying to be poems, and they are really bad. And so he publishes these poems, and then he explains why they're bad. I mean, the book is unbelievable. You would love it. I'll have to send you a copy. And I wrote, when the book was published, I have a little introduction that I wrote for it. And the poems are truly atrocious. And his essays about why they're bad are so funny and smart. And he's, it's incredible. Like his writing, and it's such a shame. Everybody should read this book, Bad Poetry. It's so good. I think you can get it on his website or whatever. But it's great.
And he's a prof at Harvard, is he?
No. He teaches at the Nieman Institute and a lot of other places, but he's not a full-time academic.
Okay.
He writes, but he lives in that area, but he doesn't teach it. He's not a prof at Harvard.
Okay. He teaches at the Nieman Fellowship for Journalism at Harvard. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess, you're right. He's a professor at Harvard. I guess we can call him that.
We could, but we want to get the dictionary out.
Sure. I don't know. Maybe. Let's give it to him.
Okay. We must resist what the poet Wallace Stevens referred to as the pressure of the real, the manner in which our souls become desensitized by the grim and unending procession of accounts we call news. We mustn't succumb to a panic that robs us of our imagination, our capacity to contemplate and wonder and invent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the deadening pressure of that your Twitter feed and your Facebook feed and all this news and all this horrible stuff. Yeah, I think he's onto that, But we talked a lot. We were sort of writing our books. He wrote this book afterwards, but we were, he read an early version of my book, and we were close, and so we talked a lot about it. But he had plenty of his own, and his thinking influenced mine as well, for sure. So
really, they're sort of companion books then.
I think I'd like to think so. I think they are in a way. That I think they are.
So poetry makes us feel together and interposes itself in the middle of a day. That's what you're recommending people do then, while they're following Trump on Twitter. Turn it off. Sit down. Read a poem.
Well, you know what I like so much about reading poems is that reading poems produces the conditions that I aspire to. People say, how do you make the time to read a poem? But actually I just decide to read a poem, and then...
You're not forcing yourself to do it, obviously.
I think when I feel most kind of horrified by the way my consciousness is moving.
Like when your dad died.
I think it was a little tough when my dad died. It was sort of more I think it was hard to concentrate for me. Yeah. But when now when I just feel so tired and just sick of everything, I'm just I need to read a poem. And then I read the poems, and I'm they themselves create a kind of penumbra of silence around them, themselves that I can then be kind of part of. And the reason I'm looking at my phone is because I feel we should really end with a poem. I think we've talked so much about it, but maybe we should end with that. What do you think about that?
I think that's
do you want to read one?
Yeah, I'd love you to read.
I think it just feels like the right thing to do here at the end of the day here in Oakland. All right. Yeah. So this poem is.
But this is a kind of almost like what meditation does for a lot of people. But
yeah, and I meditate too. Erratically and with limited effectiveness. But but meditation is a little different because it's sort of. There's something about reading a poem that's very you're submitting to a particular other consciousness. Yeah. And when you meditate, you're sort of encountering your own consciousness and its workings, which are.
So meditation is more like writing a poem than reading.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Maybe it is. Yeah. Yeah, although I think of writing a poem as a little more like, when I meditate, I try not to be exerting a lot of will. I try to be just observing.
Observe the thoughts go by and let them go by.
But writing poems, I think, is more active than that for me. But, which creates certain problems. You have to be very aware of not just replicating your own most kind of like banal thinking. That's the whole danger. Is like, and that's the sort of interesting thing about it. Meditating is you're like, oh yeah, that's that thought I've had 5 million times. Here it is again. Isn't that interesting? Like, that's good. But when you're making a poem, you're like, I gotta shake myself out of that a little bit and sort of have a new thought.
Right. I want to make this something that's unfamiliar.
And I believe that I believe, and I guess this would lead maybe into the poem that I'm going to read right now. But I believe that if you do that, you're going to get led to thoughts and ideas that really will matter to other people and really will help other people live their lives, as Stephen says. But that's a risk you take as a poet. You're like, if I really free myself and I start to think in these different sorts of ways, is that really what's going to happen? I don't know. But I'm going to try, and I'm going to try, and I'm going to try. And maybe it doesn't happen, but then it happens. And the times that it happen, you keep those times. And then you assemble them, and maybe they become a book that's really merits the attention of a reader, such as yourself, And that's the work of being a poet. It's the sort of humiliating, grindy work of being a poet. You just keep trying, and a lot of your tries aren't going to come off, But that's okay. Nobody else has to know.
They don't see that.
I'm pretty diligent about not letting other people see the bad things. So.
And your motivation is to make my life better.
Yeah, it is actually. I mean, as maybe as like cheesy as that sounds, I think maybe not make it better, but just like help you, not help, but be with you, be together, not be so lonely, not just be and help us think better together. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's something about that feels a little bit like cheeky or something, but it's like I do feel it's my best thinking. It's the best part of me. And I'm going to give it up, for everybody. But then you're exposed because it's your best thinking, and somebody's like, your best thinking is stupid, or I'm not interested in it. That doesn't feel very good. Yeah. But that's okay. I mean, because if you really have done the best you can, then you're not going to be.
Well, I think that the most painful thing is just people not paying any attention at all.
Well, I don't worry too much about that. I go out into the world and I read poems or meet people and I have conversations like this one, and I think this is all that matters. Like, I don't worry about all the people who aren't reading my poems. I mean, that would be, I understand that most people aren't reading my poems. They come out like an idiot. But I don't really worry about it. It's like, that's not my job to like worry about that. My job is to make these things and make them really good. and not just good, but like worthwhile, worth your time. So we'll see if this is worth your time. So this is just a poem. So I'm a professor. We didn't talk about all about that, which is great because I'm on sabbatical right now. But part of being a professor is you gotta you show up at the every May, for graduation, and you gotta like put the regalia on. You put the black robes on, and then the hood and everything, and all the colors. You guys have that up in Canada, right? Too. And so, you're suddenly part of this kind of weird medieval system. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot about the strangeness of that, that the formality of it, and like what's really going on in those graduation ceremonies. So anyway, this poem is called Graduation Day.
And what collection is it from?
It's a new poem.
Oh, it's a new poem. Is it going into the next book?
I think so.
Good.
Right now I'm just writing a lot of poems. I don't know what's going on and what's not, but I think it will. Graduation Day. Drawn by ceremonial obligation up from sleep, I woke and stepped into the borrowed black robes, all ghost bureaucrats trained to redirect dreaming, pretend we do not like to wear. I drove my black car to the stadium, to sit on stage and be watching young expectant spirits, one by one with dread certainty pass before me, clouded in their names. Then listen to no one in their speeches say, "You're welcome," for allowing us not to tell you it's already too late to learn anything or defend whatever accidental instrument in us causes all these useless thoughts. Like if you walked for hours through the vast black avenues of those server farms, all of us with our endless attention built, you could almost feel the same peaceful disinterest as when your parents talking and smoking raise their heads for a moment to smile and tell you, go back upstairs and read the book you love about myths that explain weather and death. Now it is almost June, and they are finally the children they always were. So more precise than anyone has ever had to be, go forget everything we told you, so you can fix what we kept destroying by calling the future.
Thank you.
Grim little poem. Well, you can see it in the next book.
Great.
2050.
And this current book is Why Poetry. I've been speaking with Matthew Zapruder, and it's published by Echo in the United States and by Anansi in Canada.
No, Nancy published Sun Bear, which was my most recent book. Yeah.
So this is published by Echo.
Yeah, which is a division of HarperCollins.
HarperCollins.
International conglomerate HarperCollins. And the paperbacks come out in June, so save your loonies and toonies.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thanks, Nigel. You're great. It was awesome to talk to you. It was really fun.